back to where we were because I don't know the
Well,
exact
with
point
my
we cut
with
off.
my
It's only a
OA
couple of minutes, but
with my OAP brain, I can't even remember what we were talking about. But it was probably COVID. Um, yeah, let's focus on the key issues. As I said, um, the first thing is to protect your sanity, um, which is at this point is the most important thing you can do.
yes,
Mass
agreed.
awakening. Yeah, as I said to Steve, um, it's basically we get out of this only by legal action, second coming of Christ, UFO, aliens, or we outlive them and outlast them.
Yeah.
So the priority is to protect your sanity, and one of the important ways you can do that is by becoming independent of the mainstream narrative.
Hmm.
And you need to have a bedrock of how to be able to look at this, and there are only two or three things you need to know so that it doesn't matter what anybody says about vaccines or data or R numbers. This is what you want as a foundation. The first thing is you go and satisfy yourself that seasonal flu, 1918 flu, Ebola, SARS, even COVID, even the infographics for COVID, even Ferguson's figure 1A, they are all normal, humped. That has really important ramifications which will go
Hump as in like flatten
absolutely
the curve hump.
like the hills outside Glasgow, if there are any hills outside
Hills
Glasgow.
outside Glasgow. Hump, big humpy hills. Yep, I
Yeah.
get that. Yep.
So yeah, literally, just as simple as that. They are humped. They go up, they come down. It's exactly what viruses do, and the only question is by how much. That instantly gives you a critical, shall we say, antidote to the biggest and most and officially sanctioned lie, which is that viruses are exponential. Even
Hmm.
the what virologists say is, well, it's exponential in the early part where you see the curve rising. That's actually inaccurate. There is so much about epidemiology in terms of its arithmetic that is inaccurate. It's actually quite scary. Um, no, a normal curve has one defining feature, and it shares this with the exponential curve, which is why they both look similar to start with. That literally each day the cases go up by a growth factor. So if it's 1.2, it goes up by 1.2. If it's doubling on a day, then 10 cases goes to 20 cases. The same in the normal. It will double for example, in the first day. The difference between the two is that an exponential curve goes up at the same rate all the time. So it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and you rapidly have the whole country infected. No contagion in history has ever been exponential, not even at the beginning. The way you
Hmm.
check this is very simple. You calculate the growth rate. If Steve there weighs 11 stone, and yesterday he weighed at 10 stone, he's gone up by 11 over 10 or 10%, or by a factor
Hmm.
of 1.1. All you have to do to find out the growth number for the contagion, you don't have to wait for the R number, which isn't even a growth number. You don't have to wait for a high priest of COVID to tell you whether it's going up or down, whether we should be scared or not. You literally divide today's cases over yesterday's cases. And it's common sense that if they're higher than yesterday, then it's going up. And if they're lower, then it's going down. Now, you can use an average, 7-day average or whatever, but that's not really material. The point is, simple arithmetic, the kind of arithmetic you take for granted, is all you need to do to know what's going on. And then, of course, you can do your own charts or you can use somebody else's charts. But it's all simple arithmetic. Now, an exponential curve, you plot it on log scales, which simply means it has one key feature, which is that it goes up in a straight climbing line. So if you want to find out if a contagion is exponential or not, simply plot the cases on an exponential on log scales. If it's not going up in a straight line, it's not exponential. And
Hmm.
every contagion goes up and down very much like on log scales. A contagion looks very much like a ball thrown through the air. You picture a ball up at 45 degrees and it'll go sailing up over the top and come on down. That's exactly what a contagion looks like. There is never an accelerating phase for a contagion. And I really want to emphasize that with one tiny proviso, that it's an artifact of arithmetic. When you go from 0 cases to 1 case, that is 1 over 0, which is infinite. So yes, for literally 3 or 4 days, it goes up dramatically, but when the cases are so low, it's not material. As soon as you get the contagion established, a week or so into it, then you'll see a very typical downtrend of the growth. It is a characteristic of the normal, or any humped curve, but it happens to be a particularly useful characteristic of the normal. And the most important thing about this is its common sense. You don't need me to tell you this, but I can point you in the direction. Think about this. A contagion starts, well, it must be growing. I mean, so you've got a positive rate of growth or a factor greater than 1. What is the definition of peak? Think of it as climbing a hill. Eventually, as you approach peak, the growth is slowing, it's easier to climb, and then at peak, today's cases are the same as yesterday's. That's the definition of peak. So growth rate at peak is 0. Well, if it started positive and it's now 0, it must have declined. So no, there is no exponential virus in history. You might have a few days of apparently horizontal growth, but in fact in hundreds of countries and hundreds of days now, which is tens of thousands of charts, I've never seen a material horizontal line. It's always either the spike at the beginning for the first couple of days and then it settles into the downtrend. And that is critical, because that means that on September 21st, when Valence mentioned if it keeps growing at the constant rate, or if, and it's a big if, he knows perfectly well it's unnatural, growing at a constant rate, that's exponential. Whitty explicitly mentioned exponential, and on the 25th joint statement, they explicitly embedded exponential in the joint government statement. There is no exponential virus in history.
And is that one of the things within a case that you're basically saying that cannot happen? They knew it couldn't happen. And
it's never happened in history in any
and
contagion.
It's not happening here, is it?
And it's not happening here. Well, except when you say it's not happening here, then we get into the issue of what are the British government reporting, because if you plot the cases and deaths to peak, you get a perfectly normal, I mean literally perfectly normal curve to peak. So although the cases were much higher than we would have expected from China, which has got nothing to do with China lying, let me touch on that. China reported up to the 15th of March, at which point their contagion was over, the data for all their provinces, and one province stood out. Hubei, it had like 85% of cases, 96% of deaths, and Hubei is the home of Wuhan. It's a province of 59 million people. It had 3,000 deaths, and basically it was the first completed contagion on land. Diamond Princess had 20% infected at sea. Hubei got out of the contagion with 3,000 deaths, 0.11% cases. So you could double that, even 10 times that, that's 1%. So when Whitty stated 80%, he was exaggerating the real world by at least 80 times. And so you've got the same man who exaggerated it 80 times on March the 3rd, on September the 21st, referring to an exponential virus. And this is all, the one thing about the exponential virus, which, and Steve picked up on this earlier, is that it allows them to say that if it curls over, or if it bends, turns into a humped curve, just as every other contagion in history has done, seasonal flu, every year, no lockdown, no masking, it does exactly the same thing, but the government says, oh look, it's curled over, lockdown is working. No, it isn't. Now, let's just highlight just how bad the lying is, and it is an outright lie. You know, if a scientist says a square is a circle, that's not a mistake. That is something so fundamental. You cannot make that mistake. It is basically outright fraud. Johns Hopkins Medical School publish daily stats, and if you look online, you should be able to find it, now. On the daily stats, it will tell you, are we flattening the curve? What does it mean to flatten the curve? And you'll see things like flattening the curve, and bear in mind, flattening the curve is government intervention. It's not sit back and let it happen, or be a little bit responsible like Sweden, but generally don't do anything, which certainly they didn't do any worse than us. Sitting back and letting it happen, you're going to get a normal contagion. Flattening the curve is supposed to be saving us, hence the masks, hence the lockdown, until we get the vaccine. So, flattening the curve is intervention. If something happens anyway, you can't claim that's the intervention. It's happening anyway. So let's look at what Johns Hopkins says. And you can go on their site. It was certainly been true, a week or month ago whenever I last looked, and it's probably still there today. You will see statements like, flattening the curve is exactly what it sounds like, the curve going flat. No, the total curve at any contagion goes flat, because it has to go flat when it's over, because it's over. So that's lie number one, total misrepresentation, which a school like the Johns Hopkins Medical School cannot possibly make by accident. Second statement, flattening the curve, what is it they say? When cases are reducing from one day to the next, that is a sign that the government is flattening the curve. Well, hang on a minute. What happens after peak? You have the peak cases, and then the next day you have fewer cases. So that's having fewer cases from one day to the next. So Johns Hopkins Medical School is claiming that every year in seasonal flu, the government intervenes to flatten the curve. No, there never has been flattening the curve for seasonal flu. So again, outright misrepresentation. If you read in the papers, there's a medical research paper, or you might see in the BBC, lockdown is working, the growth in cases is reducing. No, as we discussed in the beginning, you cannot draw a humped curve without the growth rate reducing. So they are stating outright, they might as well say a square is a circle, because these are simple arithmetical statements of,
but people are believing this. People are believing this, Andrew, and they're getting it from the BBC, and they're getting it from Whitty and Co. and Boris and Co. And they're using it against us to argue, and they believe it 100%. They say, well, the lockdown's working.
Well, exactly, so, and we can we'll go into lockdown, because we've seen. Let me touch on the larger issue there. That this isn't degree level. This is literally up and down. This is looking and saying, well, obviously at peak there are more cases than after that. So how can Johns Hopkins say that's a sign of flattening the curve when it happens in every contagion in history? And what is extraordinary is it's not that people are believing it. It's that no scientists, no mathematicians. How many people have A-levels in maths in Britain? It must be in the millions. How many people have PhDs? It must be in the tens of thousands. How many professors are there in physics and chemistry and mathematics? That's got to be in the thousands. And the SAGE Group advisors, these are supposed to be the brightest minds in Britain. And they don't just allow, they misrepresent utterly fundamental math. They might as well say a square is a circle. You cannot misrepresent this by accident. And yet none of those tens of thousands of qualified individuals are speaking up to say this is nonsense.
Do you think some of them have calculated it and they don't want to speak up, or do you think they're just so sleepy or brainwashed?
Well, if a professor is sleepy, I think that's a lamentable excuse. Yeah. It's very simple. All these people are paid for by the government. They're university professors, or they're in companies that don't want to rock the boat, or mainstream media, which is receiving all the advertising revenue. Every arm of the state is engaged in what is essentially a war against the people of Britain. And we are not alone, obviously. And here's a key thing. If you look at the statistics, we were, through the primary contagion, the number 3 worst hit in the world, and we are again up there at the moment. Now, here's a strange thing. Impoverished, disease-ridden Africa is getting away doing, they're about 100 times better than us. South Africa is the exception to the rule, but basically the rest of Africa is totally brushing us off. The Far East is totally brushing this off. The three centers of Western power, New York City, representing America, was hit 500 times worse than the Far East. I call it the Cuomo virus because there is just zero.
Yeah.
There is zero connection with the COVID.
Yeah.
Belgium, the headquarters of the EU, happened to have been hit 133 times worse than the Far East, and the UK was hit 122 times worse than the Far East at the end of the primary contagion. Now let's see, the 3 Western power centres, with all that money, all that wealth, all that scientific expertise, were managing to be hit 100 times worse, 500 times worse for New York than impoverished Africa and the Far East. That is simple insanity. And when you start to look at cause, I mean, I hardly even have to mention, but again, it's a matter of public record. Let's be clear why we're here. Forget conspiracy theory. And forget even the fact that Great Reset and all the rest of it, it's all out there and it's all public and it's everyone telling us how wonderful it's going to be and what we need. Let's be quite clear as to what the government says is the agenda. There's a massive threat based on Ferguson, which was totally fraudulent, and there are many ways to show that, but I can, do one or do
This
a
is
number.
right back in March. Is
Sit
that,
back
is
in.
this in March?
Whitty started the narrative for the UK the moment he said 80% infected. Just under a fortnight later, Ferguson basically provided the same numbers, but with the scientific stamp of Imperial College. And then a week after that, the country went into lockdown, and the government was quite clear about the agenda: massive threat, lockdown, wait for the vaccine. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist, and it's not a conspiracy theory. We are doing exactly what we've been told by the government as their agenda. Massive threat, lockdown, wait for the vaccine. Now, I don't know where you want to go next, but we can look, for example, at the UK for lockdowns working. I don't know if you've got that chart, or we can do it verbally.
Yeah, what one is that?
That should be the English humped curve with the purple growth line. And if you get a picture of a nice dolly bird or a seaside resort, we'll chat about that instead.
I'm in the wrong.
Don't worry about that. I'll say one of the things that I want to touch on earlier, and brings it back to this, is that what is extraordinary is how little intellect is being applied to debunking this. Instead, what we're getting is ridiculous scientific papers claiming to back the fraud. I mean, we've highlighted John Hopkins, and we've got Ferguson saying lockdown saved 470,000 lives, which is basically his 510,000 less 40,000 deaths. No, totally fraudulent. But, for example, somebody else published, they said, now they're clever. Notice the wording. Lockdown is associated with a reduction of growth in the virus. Associated with. They never say lockdown is working. They never say lockdown is slowing the virus. It's associated with. Well, I've got news for you. This is a news flash for your viewers. April Fool's Day was associated with a slowing rate of virus. Shrove Tuesday was associated with a slowing of the virus. So Shrove Tuesday and April Fool's Day are the real reason that the virus came to an end. No, not really. Because the slowing of the rate of the virus is an inevitable and natural event. You might as well clap for nurses and claim that slowed the rate of the virus. You
Yeah.
might as well clap for nurses and say that's why the sun came up. There is
Hmm.
no causative link, and if you do want to understand what's going on with the contagion, it's actually extremely straightforward. All you need to do is to track. You can track the graph, but you can also track the growth. Right now, you
Hmm.
did with this with your kids. You put them up against a wall, um, and then used a marker to show how high they were. And if you'd plotted that on a chart, you'd have seen their growth rate over time. And if you'd plotted it as a factor or a percentage, you say, oh, Jimmy's grown 5% in the last year. That's all you have to do. Now,
Hmm.
because of the nature, and again, it doesn't depend, it's backwards. You don't have to believe that contagions are normal and then start doing the analysis. What you do is you start tracking the data and then you just notice, well, that growth line is going down, and on a log scales it goes down in a straight line. That is a
Hmm.
signature of a normal curve. We don't care that it's normal or not normal or log normal or Gompertz or Williams or anything. It doesn't matter. What matters is the growth going up or down? You don't have to wait for Whitty or Valence, an R number, the high priests. You can just do it with simple arithmetic. But now there's something else. If we see that the growth rate is going down in a straight line, now think of this as a paper dart, if you will. Steve lobs a paper dart across the room to me, 500 miles away, so it's a bloody good dart. I throw a rock at it. How do we know if my rock hit the paper dart? If the rock hits the paper dart plummets to the ground, trailing flames if we've got CGI. If the dart just carries on serenely until it lands gently on the ground, I missed. So if we've got a normal curve and we plot the growth rate, then you get, and I don't, if you find it, it's the one with the purple line, you will see that the growth,
Let,
and
let
you,
me see if I can get this in,
yeah,
Andrew. That you can have a look at this. I'll take
not
this
that one.
myself.
That's the ridiculous. Actually, but if you can you put that full screen for a second?
Yeah, I'll put it full screen. You should
Right.
still.
This one, just so you know, down at the bottom are all the Far Eastern countries. That's their
Hmm.
COVID. At the top is Belgium, and red is us, and blue is United States. That is
Yeah.
our COVID.
So, so,
Anyone?
so, so basically, so the top is Belgium here. I think people will be able to see my mouse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So that's Belgium.
yeah.
Yeah. And then we're talking about UK here.
And notice how it's climbing, escalating dramatically. No vaccine-related deaths there, of course.
Hmm.
Oops, not allowed to say that.
Yeah, of course. Yep. And
And
that's right
and
up to the 22nd of January. Then you've got the USA,
yeah, and the point is, you look at the scale by
and that's the
contrast,
other countries
and these
down
are all
here.
in deaths per 100 million. So it's a level playing field.
Hmm.
Africa, you'd see the same, except South Africa would be up, sort of halfway up there. The point is that to be massively hit, look at the left hand side, to be massively hit versus the Far East in the first contagion is one thing. But did they not invent the telephone? Did nobody call any of these countries and say, excuse me, how did you do it? And the simple
Hmm.
fact is, they don't want to be effective. I'm sorry, that may be my opinion, but you cannot be this incompetent. They have
Yeah.
taken every measure to ensure that we have the maximum fear and maximum deaths. But that's a much longer story. But the simple thing is that chart just illustrates that we are not experiencing the same COVID as the rest of the world, and that's the
And that's right. Yeah, because I mean, America, the way America's COVID rolled out, it looked very political. Let's say because it's peaked just at when Biden got in, and you can. Yeah, there's definitely a political element to it, and
yeah. I mean,
the youth.
I to be honest, as I kind of leave them to it. It's like we know who we know. We've all got our background in New World Order and all the rest of it. It's like we don't even need to go there. All we need to know is that it's as fraudulent, as exaggerated over there as it is over here. Anyway, but let's
Yeah.
move on. Let's see if we can find the that one. Whoa, that's a very interesting one. But no, we'll pass on that. That's
Let me just quickly because I've got
now.
quite a
Oh,
few here.
come back to that previous one for a second.
Yeah.
Um, uh, one more. Right. I really would encourage you to look up the World Health Organization daily situation reports. This is the
Hmm.
March 15th report showing the breakdown. China gave us all the data we needed to know a realistic figure for what should have occurred in the UK, and this is the March 15 breakdown of provinces with Hubei, 59 million people, massively hit, everyone else getting away. What we're looking at is prima facie evidence that a strategy that works is blockade, not lockdown, putting people in their homes, but not letting people move to other contaminated provinces. That seems to have worked very well. Lockdown, however, in Hubei didn't work any better than anywhere else. Anyway, so I encourage you to have a look at the daily situation reports and just realize that the information was there. We didn't have to live through this. This information was there March 15th. Anyway, carry on to the next slide.
Yep.
Now, this is a critical. That happens to be it,
That one's Italy. I
but
think
but
that
it's
one's
but
Italy.
but it's close enough because we can look. Italy was the first European country, and we can
Hmm.
look at the key elements here because when you will not see a chart like this pretty much anywhere else. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm the only one that could do this, but I do seem to be the only one that is doing this. Now,
Now, to the untrained eye, that is hard reading, and what I'd like to do, if we could,
I
is
know
to
I'm
make
going.
that
What I'm going to do is I'm only going to focus on the key elements to emphasize what you can do yourself.
okay.
And what you need to focus on. So the blue line, the dark blue line, is
Yeah.
up and down. That's cases, and yeah. So and now the magenta line down the bottom, that's cases up to March 14th. That's what Ferguson had access to. Which
Yep.
so I'm using this as part
So,
of
so that,
testimony.
this line here represents when
That's
Ferguson was
that's
looking to
Ferguson's.
make his
That's yeah.
projections.
That's what he claimed to make his projections to. So you can see Italy was already well developed, and that there was no excuse for pretending that it was going to go to 100 million or 500. 500,000 deaths. But let me just highlight there are only three critical things that I'd like you to take away from this. The first is that if you look at the purple line, growth decline for cases to the left, it's inside the gold channel. So up a bit, Bernie, up, not that, that's the magenta, this one. Now that line there, that is, okay, I'm using averages to smooth it out, but that is literally as simple as cases today over cases yesterday.
Hmm.
And you can see that the factor is declining. So if it was twice 2 days ago and 1.5 a day ago and 1.1 a day after that, it's declining. And a declining curve is necessary for a humped curve. So it's the same thing. It doesn't matter whether you talk in terms of acceleration or speed or distance, as long as each can be translated into the other.
Hmm.
So the important thing about this is that declining curve is exactly what you expect, and that proves it's not horizontal. The green line is horizontal. Um, that proves that this is not an exponential virus, which is
Hmm.
exactly what we expect. Now, the other thing is that given the cases, what we can do is that we can what I call auto fit a normal to peak, because we know the peak, so we know the peak date, and we know how many cases there are to peak, and so we can double that and pretend that it's symmetrical. And that tells us both how big a normal curve and how tall it should be. And the only thing we need to know is how wide it should be. And the nice thing there is that if it's too narrow, it will be too tall, and if it's too wide, it'll be too short. So this is a simple arithmetic curve, but what that dotted line humped, now not that one, that's significant for a different reason, but the one above that, that is showing you what a normal contagion would have looked like. And the important thing is when people try and tell you, oh, it's Gompertz, no, a Gompertz would have to have been far earlier.
Hmm.
Distorted. What you're looking at is a curve that is almost perfectly normal to peak. And then
So,
after,
what happened in Italy after that? Like, after the 14th of March, where did that purple line go? Where
well,
did it go?
well, if you can we can actually move, if we move on to the UK, and try and find the one that has the purple line all the way. Now, oops, stop there. Go back to that one for a second,
That
because
was Germany. This one.
let's this, although it's a different topic, so it's also a critical. It's another of the critical topics. You're not supposed to die the day you enter hospital or the day you're
Hmm.
diagnosed. So in Germany, you can see peak deaths in blue on the left, and you can see peak cases in blue on the left and peak cases in red on the right. And if you
Hmm.
have a look, there's a 14-day lag. So basically, you get diagnosed, you're in hospital, and 14 days later you die. That
Hmm.
is reasonable. If we get to look at Spain, you will see that they are reporting that you died the same day you were diagnosed. That is an
Hmm.
absurdity and an indicator of
Hmm.
fraud. In the UK, you will see that they reported peak deaths was reported to be within 12 hours of peak cases. That is a massive indicator of fraud. It's just another one. Okay, carry on. Let's see if we can track down this other slide. Okay, well, just hold there for a second. Um, that just want to highlight this is Hubei, and again, you're seeing curves which are
This is Wuhan, China. This is the province
that's
that's.
Hubei, yeah, which is Wuhan, China. That's showing again perfectly normal curves. The reason the case is a little abrupt is because before that they were doing it by doctor's diagnosis, so they weren't confirmed cases. But again, perfectly normal. We were dealing with a perfectly normal contagion, and the fact that it goes a little bit sideways towards the bottom, who cares? It's over. It's perfectly normal to be perfectly reasonable. We were not dealing with a novel. There may have been a novel virus. It was not a novel contagion. There was nothing
Mhm.
unusual about this in the least. Carry on. Let's see what else we've got lurking around there. Right, what have we got?
Spain.
Spain. Now look at this. This is priceless. Um, so, according to the official government reports of Spain, you die before you're diagnosed with COVID. So, forget a hospital stay. It saves a lot of money. You've got COVID, you're dead. Um, I mean, you know, if this was
Yeah.
NCIS, you wouldn't need Abby to go and do an analysis to, oh, we found the DNA of the leaf from the South American bobo tree. It's absurd. You don't even get to be diagnosed and you're already dead.
Hmm.
And that is a prime, I mean, that's a prime cause for the Guardia or police of Spain to go and raid the government offices and find out what is going on. So carry on. And just highlighting, we're not alone in fraud. Korea, right, here's the USA. I'll just touch on this briefly. Again, same thing. This is for testimony. Down at the bottom, there's a little orange worm. That is the information that Ferguson claimed to be working to, except it wasn't even this, it was even less. Because this is cases. And he had 21 days, and that from that worm, he was supposed to project the future of the Western planet. And,
Yeah.
that is an act of insanity. You know,
This little bit
that
here.
little bit
This
there,
this.
he's
This
supposed to
yeah.
project it. And
Yeah.
what you can see in the dashed blue line to the right is a very reasonable, now down at the bottom, the dashed one, yeah, that is a very reasonable projection of that initial 21 days. But you can
Yeah.
see the point was it hadn't even got started. And, to attempt, Ferguson claims he had such an extraordinary model that he could use that data to generate a risk guess. It is pure fraud. It's simple insanity.
Ferguson's a massive part of this, and there
Oh,
was
totally,
money
totally.
from Bill Gates to him that was kind of time sensitive as well, wasn't there?
No,
His.
yeah, there's a lot. We'll see how patient people feel like being and whatever. Let's see if we can find the UK because it's a really critical slide. If we find
This one.
now, this is again the testimony. We want the full line, but again, this is what Ferguson could have seen. Again, look at down at the bottom. You've got that tiny little worm, but at least it's going up. And again, it was just enough. If you look at the dashed blue line. Um, that's not bad. Frankly, that was what 57,000 cases as opposed to 128. Compared to Ferguson, 100 times or 130 times larger. I would have been very happy if they'd said, well, we've projected 60,000 cases and we ended up with 120. Fine. It wouldn't have changed the planet. And look at the deaths at that would have been 2,500 as opposed, so that could have been gone to 5,000. I mean, that would have been totally fine. And again, this is the point. Back of the envelope on Hubei, 3,000 deaths, 59 million people. Scale it up to Britain, 3,400 deaths. Trivial. That's what Ferguson could have said. Oh, but lockdown. Well, it didn't work in Hubei and it doesn't work over here. But the important thing again is look at the purple line and the gold channel. Growth is declining exactly as you expect. There is zero excuse to call this an exponential virus. And and I hope the viewers are getting. This is not a PhD rocket science telling you this. This is literally arithmetic. 2 divided by 1 is 2. If the next day it's 4 divided by 3, that's 1 and a third. The growth rate has gone down. You could do this at home. It's trivial. Keep going. Let's see if we can find the one that's got the whole of the UK. Right. Now this is really, so this sort of does it, but this does it for flu. But we'll use it, and I did it for precisely for this reason. Here is seasonal flu. This is flu A in the 2017-2018 season, and as you can see, we've fitted the normal. Yeah, it looks close enough. It is a little bit tight, but fine. Up and down, hump curve, fine, not an issue. Now,
and what are these numbers at the bottom?
That's actually days, or actually, sorry, weeks. That's actually the week of reporting.
So week number 51.
Yeah, week number 51. So just well, whatever that is, post either Christmas or post Christmas. So this is the 2017-2018 flu season, up and down, just like any other curve. Pretty damn close to normal. That's absolutely fine, close to symmetrical. Now, it's really critical that you absorb this, and it doesn't matter that you understand it, but just absorb that it's out there. Look at the purple line. You see what I mean? In the early days, yes, it's rising. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down, and then it gets a sharp spike as it starts properly. And then look at what happens: a long decline throughout the curve.
That's peak there, is that right?
That's the peak growth, but that's not peak. That's the highest point of growth, and it can ignore growth is all but irrelevant. There's a far more important number, but we won't worry about that too much. The point is it's the rate of descent. Now look at that line going down. Now what happens when that purple line, and then you can ignore it to the right, it's over, it's in the tail. The important one is the descending line through the primary contagion, which is to the left, basically under the curve. Now what happens when growth hits 1? That means that today's cases are the same as yesterday's. That's peak. So you can see that where the dash line, which is the trend line, hits the green unity line, is right underneath peak. That is inevitable. So, and we'll see this in the UK, you can actually see when peak is going to happen by projecting that line. You can see if you move your cursor a fraction to the left, now you can see that the growth was heading towards peak a day or two earlier, but it just spiked back up a fraction, not a big deal. And you can see at the top in cases there was a sort of double peak, one peak and then a second. But the critically important thing is they have no excuse for calling this exponential. That you cannot have a humped curve without that growth line declining, and if you've got a growth line declining, you've got a hump curve. It's the same thing. Now, this is a flu season. There was no lockdown. There was no mask wearing. So let us just play a game. Let's say down the bottom there's a purple arrow through the primary contagion. Right, that purple arrow, let's say that lockdown is declared that day. Right? Now, technically, it takes a week for the infecteds to become symptomatic, so it's going to take a week before lockdown becomes effective. So, we'll call it the green arrow. It's not quite right, but just to the right of there. But you should start seeing the trend plummet, just like the paper dart heading to the ground. That growth line should plummet. It's not enough that it continues approximately on the same trend, and you can see that basically with a little bit of a wiggle in the middle, you've got the same kind of trend of decline. That does not suddenly collapse in flames. If it's not basic, and you can see from the shape of the curve, it didn't do anything dramatic, it just looked like any other humped curve. That is proof that lockdown had zero effect. Well, in flu, there was no lockdown, so of course it had zero effect. But that's what we're going to be looking for in the UK chart. So if you carry on back, one of these charts, I hope. That's okay. Just stop up. Just skip. This was just an example. I think this is Ebola. There you go. Yeah, probably Ebola. More humped curves. So you've got flu, you've got Ebola, you've got COVID. Humped curves is just normal. It's just what contagions do. So when anyone tries to tell you that it's humped because of lockdown, that's totally fraudulent. You have to do a more advanced analysis like the one I'm just doing. Okay, carry on. By the way, this is just a little. I just threw this up, something I prepared earlier, but it harks back to our first presentation. But something to notice here. On the left is the ordinary risk of being at that age, and on the right is the risk of dying with COVID. Now, they're not absolutely identical, but they start the same and they end the same. So think about what that means. It means that whatever age group you're in, your risk of dying if you catch COVID is the same as risk of dying if you don't catch COVID. Well, it's very difficult to see how COVID can be a material threat. Think of it, you're 85 and over, you've got a 14% chance of dying that year just because you're old, and you've got a 14% chance of dying if you catch COVID. So tell me why COVID is any different from just being alive. Now, this ties in with what we said earlier, that COVID has not managed to kill more people than either of the primary leading causes, cancer overall, or external events, or circulatory disease over 35. So it hasn't really done a very good job being a killer disease. It is a killer disease that requires 92% of people to have two, on average between 1.7 and 2 existing illnesses. So it can't. I mean, I can't say it can't, but it's like it is a minuscule risk that COVID can manage to kill you on its own, and chances are you've got some other thing they didn't acknowledge. But who knows? Who cares? Because it's not even enough to be old. You have to be old and sick before this virus can kill you. I mean, yes, fine, you'll find 3 or 5 people under the age of whatever who died, and we'll look at that chart. But the bottom line is, but the bottom line.
They're on our friends list. They're on our friends list. Those people, they're telling us, oh, but I know my cousin.
Oh, absolutely. You know what? Even without I mean, my reply to that is simple. I mean, we had one that had I know 6 people who died who were young and had. It's like, well, congratulations, because you've got about 40% of the entire population that died young, and the simple answer to that is and as a strategy, is just simple. Acknowledge what's true, and let them have their say. It's like, oh, I know a mate, he died. He was 20 and he died with COVID, and he had nothing wrong with him. Okay, well, your friend was one of the unluckiest people in Britain, because that is so utterly rare. I would rather worry about being struck by lightning, and and it's fine. If somebody wants to say that, fine. But the bottom line is, a disease that requires you to be old and sick before it can kill you doesn't exactly come across as a life-threatening disease. And when we look at the figures and how it's affected young kids, it's heartbreaking what they're doing. Anyway, let's keep going, and hopefully we'll.
Well, the effect on kids, Andrew, is really. I think it's now starting to hit parents. I think they're now getting it for the first time. That mental health is
God,
damaged.
overdue. But we'll hopefully there are a couple of charts here. Again, so pneumonia, influenza, up and down, up and down, up and down. Anybody that ever mentions exponential to you again, just blow your horn. It's instant fail, instant fraud. And if it's Witty or Valence or a government announcements or mainstream media, well, you now
And
know.
what's that big spike there then? That was
They had a bad,
2017.
so they had a bad season, whatever that was, 2018. This is probably, I don't know who this is. This might be CDC. It's America. Anyway, but there you go, up and down, up and down, up and down. Totally normal, no intervention. This here's whoops. Just let's go back to that one. This you've seen this figure, similar figures. So this just happens to be one that I did. Um, that if you were under 60 and had no pre-existing condition, a grand total of 500 people are dead. And for that, they have put 66 million people in open prison. It is
Absolutely.
an insanity. But anyway, carry on. I mean,
But even that 542, that number is not correct because they're basically saying, yeah, COVID's on their death certificate.
yeah, and
That's
I don't even argue with.
you don't even need to know that
Yeah,
because it's still the figure stands up anyway.
yeah. My attitude is I don't argue with the figures and say, oh, they didn't. I take their figures and show that they are already sufficient evidence for fraud. I don't need to argue that it should have been 543 or whatever, because
Yeah,
it's already fraudulent. You just don't need it.
yeah.
Anyway, carry on. Now this is totally I certainly was not the first to point this out, but it blew me away. And this is backed up officially in the ONS or NHS reports or whatever. But this is the World Health Organization global flu surveillance. Flu stopped worldwide. This is happens to be Canada, and you can go onto this site and check the link if you can see it at the top. Is whatever it is, apps.who.in.something Flu Mart.
Yep.
Flu literally stopped March 23rd.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinary. Flu just stopped dead the same week that the Western nations, and if you go around the world, the March 23rd was a really popular week for establishing lockdown. Of course, the week after Ferguson, but flu just stopped, and the Daily Mail.
What do doctors think about that though? Like, what are doctors saying that flu's suddenly stopped when they've dealt with
Well,
it every year?
and now the Daily Mail has only just published, and this is again why I loathe the mainstream because you know they they cover their backside because they're just reporting what's so. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, but there comes a point which I'm just reporting people going to the train station that will not come back again. Yeah, at some point you become complicit in what is going on, and the mainstream media are complicit.
Yeah.
So they're saying, so, and people say, oh my God, look how effective the measures have been. It's stopped flu. So let's see, it's stopped a flu virus, but another virus has escalated out of control. Um, Alternate scenario, the flu is one of the numbers they're pouring into COVID. But anyway, it's just entertaining in its own right. It's absurd. That happens to be Canada. Right now,
That,
this is the critical slide, and everyone take a deep breath. I hope I haven't overstressed your brain because this is if you had one slide to sort of print and put up on the wall. This is the one. This is the one. It tells you everything you need to do. So let's see how good Steve is with his mouse. So the dark blue line is cases. Okay. So there we go, rising up to peak. Peak is around 7th or 8th April. Now and then now not no and then stay on the solid blue line and oops, oh well, no, we don't want to come down. No, we can't come down. We haven't got the vaccine yet. I'm sorry, Ebola, SARS, seasonal flu, 1918 influenza. Did you see this in any of those charts? No. The virus is a simple biomachine. It has got no internet connection. It's got no idea what's going on. As a source pointed out to me, if you think it's cruel that old people die, imagine what it looks like to the virus when a person dies. It just lost an entire continent in that person. It's like, well, that's not it. It has no intention. It doesn't want to die. It wants to carry on. It's like it. But So the virus has no interest in peak. It just doesn't know peak. The constant decline, and again, if we look at the left hand, look at that purple line. You know, a little bit wavy to start with, but it's a wavy and a downtrend. And look at that lovely purple line, and then going to the right. Now let's walk through that slowly. But again, just from looking at the hump curves of the other diseases, you know, it's like, why doesn't this follow the dotted line? And look at the dotted line. That's the autofit normal. Look at how close the dotted line is to the actual cases reported on the way up, and even
Yeah,
starting.
correct.
That is so close to being perfect. You know, forget Gompertz. People use Gompertz to try and explain the asymmetry to excuse the UK. You cannot excuse the fraud that is being generated. And this slide shows you exactly what is that fraud. It doesn't explain, you know.
That's difficult to do, isn't it? I mean, if
That,
that's
that's
the
to,
actual
that
trend,
that's
that takes a lot of work to push that up.
exactly that's totally absurd, and it gets even more entertaining when we look at deaths as well. But let's look at what this is. Now, what have we seen? You cannot draw a humped curve without the growth rate declining, and it's vice versa. If you draw a straight line of the growth rate declining, and then you calculate, just as you can do speed from acceleration, acceleration from speed, you can literally draw the hump curve from the purple line, or you can draw the purple line from the hump curve. It's the same thing, and as you can see, it's declining. Now, let's look at this. Daily Telegraph correctly said that peak would be about the 11th. And what can we look at when we see the purple line coming down to hit the green line? It's a little early, it's more like the 8th or something. But yeah, it just shows the Telegraph was capable of analysing, but it will not call the fraud. But the point is, there you go, exactly what you expect. Now, and let's just have a look. What should have happened is the growth keeps on declining in the dotted line, so the cases go lower and lower, and then look at that. By early May, this contagion would have been over. We would have, I mean, so far back in the dawn of time, it's difficult to imagine it. We'd have had a bad month, a couple of bad months. We'd have
And
lost.
that would have been acceptable. You would have recovered from that
That's it,
if the
all over, and
yeah,
fine. If
yeah.
if we're going to get that again next year, fine, whatever. And that would have been, 5,000 deaths or whatever it would have been extra. It's like, okay, oh yeah, it's a shame, but then we've got winter excess, we've got flu, we've got cancer. I mean, at the end of the day, it would have just been, but guess what? The vaccine was not going to be ready for 6 months to 18 months. So the virus, which does not have the internet and has no idea what's going on, suddenly at peak at the green line, the purple line stops going down and acts abnormally and goes sideways. And it starts a completely new contagion, and when it does decline, it goes down slowly. Because guess what? That exaggerates, when you associate with deaths, you get exaggerated deaths, delayed virus, extended contagion. Totally abnormal. You won't find it in any other contagion. I've shown you that Ebola, SARS, flu, seasonal flu, whatever. It's unique to COVID. And what else is unique to COVID? All the measures and all the narrative and all the agenda and Event 201 and Mr. Gates and all the
Yeah.
rest of it. We are in a game, and when the virus behaves abnormally, it's not the virus behaving abnormally. Now,
Mhm.
so you've seen what happens when the growth when the growth ceases to look normal. But before
Mhm.
then, does it look in any way abnormal? No, it's declining in a downtrend exactly as you would expect, and as we've seen with the dotted line, perfectly normal. So here's the thing: the pale blue line was lockdown declared on the 23rd of March. So the purple line is our paper dart floating through the air, descending down to peak. Lockdown is declared on the 23rd of March. Now, 23rd of March, anyone who has just got infected from little Johnny and whatever will now have to wait 7 days before symptoms show. So in 7 days' time, they'll be recognised as a case. So in the following week, anyone that's recognised as a case is really somebody that got infected before lockdown. But then after 7 days, now everybody's in their home and the cases should plummet. So you should see, even if it was going up like a ball or like a clay pigeon being thrown through the air, you fire at it and it should go bang sideways. So you should see a massive distortion at the orange line in the trend, and you can see in the blue line the case, it just keeps going quite happily, going up, perfectly normal. And in the growth line, what do we see? Do we see any divergence whatsoever to the left or right of the orange effective date? In the
No.
between, there's nothing. It's not the blue. I mean, the blue is true, but also the purple line. That's the growth. That's a paper dart sailing gently to the ground at the orange line, where you can see that I've put a pale mauve line down to massive change after peak. That's what it should have looked like if lockdown was working. It should have plummeted to the ground, just as the cases should have plummeted sideways. But nothing.
Because you're doing something, because you're intervening and doing something so different with a lockdown that you'd expect to see a plummet.
Well, if it does, if it doesn't change if it doesn't change how the cases are behaving, it hasn't had an effect. I see people writing newspaper articles saying, given the damage, it's arguable, it's difficult to determine if nobody has shown that lockdown has had any benefit. That is far too weak. It isn't that nobody has shown that lockdown has had no benefit. This is simple arithmetic. It's like saying, did a batter hit the ball? Well, it's in the catcher's glove. I don't think so. It's did the whatever it is, the clay pigeon marksman hit the clay pigeon? No, it sailed on unperturbed and intact. Did the paper dart get hit by the stone? No, it just carried on floating down. What you're looking at here is absolute proof that lockdown had absolutely zero effect. And what is the policy they have imposed on us? And they could have admitted this within a week. But look at this. By April.
And is this a big part of the evidence then for a
Oh,
court case? And
absolutely,
you're basically saying
absolutely.
lockdown never worked. You can
Well,
prove it
it's
never worked.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, that's not so much our case against Ferguson, because well, actually, I mean, yes, he claimed that it saved 470,000 lives, which is total nonsense. So yes, this slide is one of the most important, because it's important because you get everything. You get the normal to peak of cases, so you get to see a standard hump curve. You get to see that you can model it with a normal and prove that it's normal, which is again really
Apart
invaluable.
from this bit here,
And then you can see how normal accentuates the abnormal. It's easy to see that that is not normal. It is literally abnormal. So you get to see that. You can see the growth decline line, which I emphasize again and again. It's just arithmetic. Today's cases over yesterday's cases. It's not rocket science. And you can plot that, if you download the data from the WHO dashboard, you could be plotting that even as we speak. And then you've got the lockdown, which should, and I've got three ways of showing that lockdown had zero effect, but they all come down to the same thing. That at the end of the day, it has to have an effect. It's a tautology. Nothing changed. The growth didn't change. The curve didn't change. Totally normal. Now, I was so astonished when we first started doing this with our videos. I literally had to write, because it followed our no lockdown projection for cases so perfectly. I literally had to write in our video, I cannot say for sure that a civil servant isn't tracking my projection to publish it. Because it's insane. Even I thought that lockdown should have an effect, and I thought I would have to show it wasn't much an effect. To have zero effect is astonishing. Anyway,
we're on lockdown 3
oh
now,
well,
and
exactly. And we're on agenda. We're on
and
agenda
and
8.
it's looking like perpetual lockdown. They don't
Oh,
seem to
absolutely.
ever be able to
It's
come
but the
out.
point, and if I speak as a citizen as opposed to a mathematician for a second, it's very simple. An abuser doesn't stop if the
Yeah.
abused takes it. Eventually, the abused has to have had enough. They either
Mhm.
die, run away, end up hospitalized, or scream, or do whatever. At some point, only um, when the abuse escapes the abuser, or does something violent against them, does it stop? The government is. People say it made a mistake, it blundered. Yeah, these people are far too smart to make
Yeah.
these kind of
No, there's probably
arithmetical errors.
mistakes.
It's
There's
not.
always
It's not
mistakes.
mistakes. Now, there's one thing. It wasn't shown in the charts, which is a shame, but it's quite priceless. Um, if you do the same chart for deaths, which you get the same distortion at peak with a difference. The deaths start coming down sooner than the cases. Now, deaths should always mirror cases.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if 100 people, call it a 10% death ratio. So if 100 people have COVID, then 10 die. If 1,000 people have COVID, then 100 die. So whatever shape the cases is, the deaths should follow it. 7 or 10 days later. Except in the UK, it's 12 hours later, or 3 days if you use averages, but that's a quirk. But what's really quite amusing about the when you do the case, you plot the cases over the deaths, is that cases go sideways as you saw, and deaths come down. So it's kind of like a two-part donkey, where the head was supposed to come off the stage, but it decided to go around and do another pirouette. But the deaths left the stage because it was bored
Yeah.
and had. So now, according to the UK government, you go from having 10% of people dying. In fact, they got to 20% at peak, to nobody dying because deaths are finished. Deaths having a holiday. I mean, and this is
Hmm.
the point. The importance of the numbers is not to calculate to three decimal places how many deaths we should have been. The importance is to realize when somebody's wearing a wig or a mask or is being abusive, or it's looking for the indicators of fraud.
Yeah.
What's that bruise on your arm? Oh, I tripped. Really? You tripped last month. It's an indicator. I don't have the police resources, and the police, would you even trust them? I can't go into hospitals and check how many people are lying in each bed and all the rest of it. Um, but I will tell you and possibly close on this. I don't know how we're doing. Anyone's still here?
Yeah.
But
I think we're kind of getting to the end of the
all
time there,
right,
but
I'll tell you. I'll tell you
we're
one
gonna.
last story, which is quite remarkable. Um, I don't have the resources to go into hospital, but if this was NCIS, and you had the billionaire setting up a rehearsal for a massacre, funding the people that committed the massacre, and then going on television to tell people how to respond to the massacre. On NCIS, if they didn't investigate that guy, people would be throwing bricks at the television. And
Yeah.
yet here we are with the Gates doing his thing. 73 million in the previous 2 years. He gave a few hundred thousand, a few million occasionally. In the same month that Imperial College publishes a fraudulent report that sends the world into lockdown and shatters the world's freedom and economy, Bill Gates is not focused on COVID at all. He's focused on malaria, and he gives them $79 million to focus on malaria. I'm sure he did.
Sure.
It's not conspiracy theory. The guy wants the headlines.
Yeah.
It's, I watch TV. That's not a conspiracy theory. But
Yeah.
anyway, and he gave the agenda on April 5th. But let me close then with this. Another of these, hang on a minute. So the model of the virus is it's contagious. That's why you're supposed to wear masks. That's why you're supposed to stay at home, social distancing, you know, um, because after all, if you're out there, somebody else could catch it. Okay, so we have a hypothetical patient zero, which was April 29th. A couple of Chinese fell ill. So that in theory is our patient zero. Um, Now, so in theory, these patients in north of England are supposed to somehow have infected someone. So here's the strange thing. You're supposed to, just like an ink drop or a rock thrown into a pond, the spread is supposed to spiral, is supposed to spread out from the source. So here's the strange thing. Four nations, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, they all had synchronized contagions. They even went to the same level, except Northern Ireland was a bit lower. They went to the same level in deaths per thousand or deaths per million, whatever you want to call it. Synchronized. It didn't wait to get from England to Wales. It didn't wait to get from England to Scotland. It just started. Now we can take this down to another level of granularity. Scottish health boards. Now, when a case becomes a case, once somebody's infected, in theory, they're supposed to, let's say they're naive and they wander around and they infect somebody else in the local shop and the supermarket and whatever. What they're not supposed to do is to go to the next county over and start it there. So if you say that the first case in a county, the first death the first case in a new area is by definition external, right? First case in England is 2 Chinese. Makes sense, external. First case, let's call the first case in Edinburgh. Second case in Glasgow. It can't happen in Glasgow. Okay, fine. You were really unlucky. The guy that got infected in Edinburgh went to Glasgow. That's unlucky. But every guy that gets infected in Edinburgh goes to a different health board to start the contagion there instead. The contagion spread faster to new health areas than it actually spread in the original district, which basically says in reality that people knew they were infected and instantly got in the car to go and infect Highlands and I think Hebrides, I think Shetland survived longest. But every mainland Scottish health region was basically infected before Edinburgh, whatever it was, had like 7 or 10 cases. I did the study a long time ago. It's absurd. Wales, the same thing. All the health boards got infected before the first board had got to double figures. England has 300 local authorities. So it's a really statistical figure. And again, it spread faster through the counties than it did in the original county. So you've got a virus where everybody that got infected got in their car and went to a new local authority, because obviously when you're infected, what you have to do is go to a new authority and make sure they suffer too. It is insane. It is a fraud indicator. If you get that England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland all start the contagion at the same time, if you get that all the health boards in Scotland, all the NHS boards in Wales and all the local authorities in England are all getting going in a massive wave of cases that come out of nowhere with no community transmission, that to me sounds like following orders. Can I prove it? I can show you the indicator of fraud, and what it would require is somebody to go into each of those and say, under oath, why did you report that case? Who was it? Give us their name, their number, and you track it and you investigate. Unfortunately, we do not live in a country where we have an independent police that we can trust to go in that is called a fraud. We would know if we had, because they would have done it already. Anyway, there you go. That's
really good. Really good. Andrew, stay on the line.
All right.
Sorry to everybody for my little gaff earlier where it kind of dropped out. I don't know what happened. I'll try and check that out. But thank you to Andrew on behalf of everybody. Absolute pleasure. We could talk for hours, Andrew. I love this stuff. I'd like to know more about the graphs, and I'll maybe speak to you offline about that.
Sorry, can I make one comment? One simple comment for your parents. Get from Steve the chart on the risk, or do the numbers yourself. Anyone who is afraid of COVID for their children or for themselves, that is not already ill and not already old, you have to be afraid of life first by a factor of 50 to 100 times. So if you are a quivering ball of fear because you could get run over, because you could fall off a ladder, because you could slip and break your arm, because your child could, find a razor blade in the bathroom, absolutely. Be aware of it. It's a real, it's a real risk, I guess, if you have an infant. But don't have razor blades in the bathroom. But if you're not a quivering ball of fear about life, you have zero excuse to be a quivering ball of fear about COVID. And you have even less excuse to be a quivering ball of fear over your children and their education. And at the end of the day, I'm not the parent. It's up to you to check the numbers and do that for yourself. But that is a hint for parents and all human beings under the age of 60. If you're not already ill and you're afraid of this, then, well, do the numbers. There are other things to be afraid of.
Okay, brilliant, Andrew. Well, listen, some good feedback there during that, but thank you to everybody. Andrew, stay on the line. You and I will have a quick chat.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks very much. Okay.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Right, Andrew, that's us. That's us now. Are you still there?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very, very good.
That was really good. And Andrew, honestly, we could have chatted for so
Oh,
much longer
quite.
there. Do you know what? I've seen a lot of your graphs over periods of time, and I'm a numbers man. I'm a graph man, and my sight's really bad.